Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Help Elevate Youth podcast. Today we have Brittany, an executive member of Youth Off the Streets, one of the most widespread youth fundraisers covering accommodation, mental health support, and much more. Brittany, if you don't mind, could you please introduce yourself and give us some info about what you do at Youth Off the Streets?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Samuel. Thank you for having me. So my name's Britt, and I am one of the senior managers for youth support services at Youth Off the Streets, or YOTS, as we call ourselves. So we deliver a range of supports and services to young people in need. Um, Starting from sort of crisis accommodation support services for young people who are experiencing homelessness, casework support, transitional sort of medium to long-term housing supports, programs for young people who are in contact with the youth justice system, young people who are struggling with drug and alcohol issues, and a range of needs, mental health needs, etc. But often impacted by homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. So I oversee all of those services in the crisis accommodation, homelessness, youth justice, and drug and alcohol space. But across Youth Off the Streets, we also have independent schools for young people who might struggle in sort of mainstream schools or be disengaged from school for some time. We have sort of more specialist assistance style education. We also have culturally specific services for First Nations young people as well. And we have also scholarships and mentoring programs, driving programs, all those sorts of things as well. So there's a range of services and supports, but for me, I oversee sort of the homelessness, drug and alcohol and youth justice space.
Right. Well, that's quite a diverse range of programs, if I'm being honest. And since this is a
Yeah.
charity, how do you guys find the funding to actually get all of this done?
Yeah, so we secure funding via lots of different sources. Some of our funding comes through government.
Yeah.
Um, so, Department of Communities and Justice, for example, fund a lot of our specialist homelessness services, our crisis accommodation, our transitional housing programs. We have funding through a health PHN service as well out in Western Sydney for our drug and alcohol services. Obviously, our schools get funded through the Department of Education. And we also do a lot of fundraising. We have corporate donors, philanthropists, and other sort of fundraising initiatives. So it's a diverse sort of base for funding. And it does kind of vary a bit depending on what's available.
Yeah, it would take a lot to make that work. Um,
Yes, we've got a really great fundraising team that sort of help us navigate that space.
yeah, that's pretty cool. This is more like a personal question to start it off, but what actually got you into Youth Off the Streets and what makes you enjoy it now?
Um, that's a good question. I think I've always been passionate about social justice, and I actually started out like studying teaching, but realized pretty quickly that I was interested in working with kids who were experiencing sort of social economic disadvantage or abuse and neglect at home and things like that. And so I had a bit of a change of careers and was really interested in youth homelessness. I read Father Chris Riley is our founder. I read his book as a student. I did fundraisers as a student to sort of give money towards Youth Off the Streets. So I was always really interested in this particular social issue. And then, sort of been working in the sector for just under 15 years now in the youth homelessness and the youth justice sort of space predominantly. And when I saw this role sort of come up at Youth Off the Streets, I thought it was a really good fit for my interest and passion for youth homelessness and a lot of the other sort of social issues that are impacting young people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness, like the drug and alcohol space, like contact with the justice system. So I think sort of just growing up, I saw a lot of people in my community, friends and family who were impacted by some of these social issues and just really keen to sort of help and quite felt like I had some skills and strengths in helping people, but really wanted to professionalize that helping into something more than just, being a good friend or a good family member.
Yeah, and it must feel really nice, like when you help someone and you see like the impact you've done. So was there like anything in particular that like you think that you appreciate the most, that you think people appreciate the most after you help them?
Uh, yeah, there's lots of, I mean, it's the kind of career that it's not for everybody, because there are obviously some really tough days and you see some really some tough things, and you're working with not many resources, um, and hearing young people's stories, which can be quite traumatic. So there's lots of challenges. So you just have to kind of celebrate all of the small wins. But I think what a lot of young people tell us at Youth Off the Streets, that we do is that we walk alongside them and we support them, and just kind of hear their story, believe them, and don't give up on them, and just sort of be that consistent support for them during what is usually a very difficult time. Um, and just provide that sense of like safety, emotional support, and practical support as well to help them, move beyond those circumstances and achieve their goals and reach their full potential.
Right. Before, like, I remember you mentioned that you worked with the drugs and alcohol unit. So sometimes I realize that, because of drugs and alcohol, it could be quite like dangerous to approach these types of people. Have you had like any encounters while you were working where, this is a dangerous situation, perhaps we should wait a little and approach it later?
Yeah, sometimes like we get a lot of training, and we do sort of risk assessments, and we have resources to help us and our workers stay safe at work. So I'm very fortunate to never have been hurt in this line of work in 15 years. But yeah, it really comes down to making sure that you're working for, that the organisation does provide um, resources and teaches you the skills to kind of do risk assessment to make sure that it is safe to actually, engage with a young person if they are, under the influence of drugs and alcohol or behaving aggressively. We do a lot of training for our staff on how to do that in a really sort of therapeutic way, because we know that often young people might be kind of like escalating or might be behaving aggressive because of some of their experiences early in life and trauma and being institutionalized. So we don't want to add to that trauma by just kind of shutting down and withdrawing service. So we teach our staff how to do that in a really kind of trauma-informed and therapeutic way, so that we're still, able to kind of that we're able to keep ourselves, our staff safe, but we're still able to provide the young person with a service or connect them to a more suitable service if they need more of a kind of crisis service, or, a hospital, police, that kind of stuff. So we work a lot with the community as well, to make sure that the right service is meeting the needs of the young person at any point in time.
And that's really great. I feel like it being safe and like having people knowing that this is a good job, but it's also safe is like quite important when you make a decision. That kind of leads me into
Absolutely. And I was just going to say another really important part of work health and safety in our sector is actually our self-care and just really being mindful of our well-being, because that's probably one of the biggest risks, is the psychosocial kind of hazards that come with this role. And like I said earlier, hearing some of the traumatic stories of young people and their upbringing and the situations that they've been in. And so, yeah, we're really mindful of obviously people's physical safety when they're going out to work, but also their psychosocial safety, and making sure that well-being is also really well supported as well. So that's equally as important as the physical safety, in my opinion.
yes, that is very true. Um, as a student in like a quite, where homelessness is quite low compared to some other areas, a lot of people around me and myself haven't really experienced um, people around us being homeless firsthand. So, do you think there are
Mhm.
any misconceptions about youth homelessness that you would want to clear up towards the younger people?
Yeah, definitely. I think that um, and I was absolutely guilty of this before I sort of worked in this sector. People, I think, have perhaps, an image in their head of what a homeless young person kind of looks like. They're sleeping rough on the streets. They might look a little bit disheveled, and there's kind of like an image that flashes into your head of like a rough, like street kid living under a bridge or something like that.
Yeah.
But there are some young people who do, sleep rough and might sort of present like that. But what I've found very early on in my career is that the majority of young people, you wouldn't know that they were experiencing homeless if you kind of saw them on the street. So they can, present just really, dressed normal like any other young person. And young people are very good at hiding if they are homeless. So they often will sleep, like do what we call couch surfing, where they're just sort of trying to get by night to night. They might be sleeping at different mates' places, or just finding somewhere that they can stay so that they're not sleeping on the street, because obviously they'd be quite vulnerable on the street. And so they will often couch surf between friends, family, and sometimes even with people that they don't know. And it can be unsafe situations that they are just looking for a roof over their head. So I think that was the biggest learning for me, is that people think that young people experiencing homelessness are sleeping rough, sleeping on the streets, but actually I would say like 90% of them are not in that situation. They're couch surfing, or they're in other unstable accommodation or unsafe situations, accommodation situations, and they do hide it very well. And even it can be little things like a lot of young people I've supported over the years have said that they use, drugs and alcohol to stay awake all night. So it looks like they're sort of out on, a weekend bender and not really sleeping. But when you kind of unpack that and you see what's going on for them behind the scenes, you find that they actually didn't have a safe place to stay. And so they've turned to drugs and alcohol as a way of kind of staying awake to keep themselves safe so that they don't fall asleep on the streets and be, put in that unsafe and vulnerable position.
Right. So if we did have a mate that we knew was homeless, obviously it'd be a bit weird to like confront them directly. What do you think we could do as like a friend to help them?
Yeah, I think just making sure that it's that we ask questions in a really kind and curious way. So and just coming from a place of trying to understand what's been going on for them that's sort of led them to this situation, not blaming or shaming people, because a lot of the time people experience homelessness, young people especially, because they haven't had access to the same supports and resources and opportunities as a lot of other young people. And so just making sure that we're not blaming someone, and that we're just coming from a really kind of open, kind and curious place, and trying to connect them with supports. We, like Youth Off the Streets, like I said, we have specialist homelessness supports. We're funded through the New South Wales government to connect with those young people and help them to find safe and stable housing. So there are supports available. So I think just coming with that really curious, open mindset, and also just trying to support and connect them in a way that's really sort of like friendly and non-judgmental.
Yeah, so pretty much being a good listener and no judgment. Yeah.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah. So sometimes we realize that um, some people don't have the money themselves to donate towards the towards Youth Off the Street and other homelessness charities. Do you think there are any other ways that we as young people who normally have less money can support homeless people?
Uh, yeah, so like at Youth Off the Streets, we have quite a big volunteer base. So we're always looking for volunteers to support, and so people can bring some of their skills and strengths and give their time. Um, so even, like out in Western Sydney, for example, we run a lot of outreach programs where we, set up barbecues and sport and things like that in the park. And we're always looking for volunteers to help with cooking a sausage sizzle or kicking the ball with young people. Sometimes we run like working bees in our crisis accommodation services, and do like, gardening and things like that. So there's definitely volunteer opportunities if you're not able to give money. Sometimes giving time is an option. But I think also just raising awareness um, of the social issue. I think sometimes it's easy to think that it's not a thing that happens these days, especially because, as I said earlier, young people are pretty good at hiding that they're experiencing homelessness. So just keeping that conversation going, especially right now, here in Sydney and especially in the inner west where we operate a lot of our specialist homelessness services, there's a significant housing crisis, and housing affordability is a massive issue for a lot of people right now, even people who do have jobs and resources and things like that. So for young people who don't have those kinds of resources and opportunities, that it's especially difficult at the moment. So just keeping that conversation going, I think is really important. And if there are opportunities to do fundraising where you're not necessarily giving them money, but you might be finding other creative ways to raise funds, and choosing an organisation like Youth Off the Streets or another youth homelessness service as your kind of preferred charity to raise funds for, we're always really grateful for those kinds of donations.
Right. I'm just really curious about like the creative fundraisers. Were there any that you think were particularly like successful?
Um, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Like we've had some really great, like a lot of corporates will sometimes have workplace giving and things like that as well, where people just sort of might give like a small amount of money around the office, but when you pull that all together, it all adds up. A fundraising initiative actually that has been pretty cool just recently within Youth Off the Streets was a giving day where we set up at our head office kind of like a call center for a day. And I think it was it was like 12 hours of people on the phones just making cold calls. And that was asking people for donations, but then we had corporate sponsors that actually matched those donations. And so altogether, we made over $300,000
Oh,
that
wow.
will go towards, our programs and services. Yeah, so that was pretty cool and innovative. I hadn't really seen anything like that before, but that was a really amazing and successful fundraising initiative. But yeah, it doesn't always have to be, big like that. Like I said earlier, when I raised, I think it was only a few $1,000s, like nearly 20 years ago as a student. I did like a student sleep out at uni where it was kind of fun. We got to sleep outside and have some activities and social events and things like that. But then we also got to give to the cause, and we got to learn more about youth homelessness as well, which helped raise both funds and awareness for the issue.
Right, yeah. Speaking of sleep out, I know my school does that right now as well. And a hard part of that is like actually convincing people to come to sleep out. So what would you say to those people who, who don't want to put themselves out there and they don't really know much about the issues that's going on right now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know how successful like a sleep out would be now, especially after kind of like COVID, and we're much more online. We're not as like we don't get outside as much as we probably used to. So I don't know, perhaps just getting to getting to know people who might be interested in learning more about the issue of youth homelessness, or contributing either by donating funds or time, especially for students, there's probably more time than funds.
Yeah.
But yeah, just trying to find out like how do they want to, like what would they find engaging to learn more about the issue? Is it about having a guest speaker come in, or yeah, I'm not too sure. Or is it engaging in a volunteering opportunity where you get a bit of exposure? So probably just go to the people that you're trying to reach to understand their interest and how they would best engage with the topic.
Yeah, that does make sense. I had a quick look at your website actually before I came on this interview, and I saw that education was like a big point that you guys wanted to address. So apart from like educating schools about youth homelessness, how important do you think that education is like outside of, just the schooling community?
Yes, so yeah, education is a really big focus for Youth Off the Streets. Our founder, Father Chris Riley, was actually a teacher. So he really believed, obviously, that education was um, really important, like critical for anybody. But it was a way for these young people to kind of have a brighter future. And so our education focus at Yachts is actually we actually do have these special assistance schools to support young people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. Um, and they take a much, they're very different to a traditional kind of mainstream school. Much smaller classroom sizes. We have youth workers that work there. We have psychologists and things like that. So that's kind of where the strong education offering sort of comes in, and then trying to work collaboratively with the schools and the crisis accommodation and the drug and alcohol services so that we can kind of wrap that support around a young person, and give them the opportunity to engage in education. But not every young person necessarily wants to do that through going to year 12 or something. So we also have a registered training, an RTO, registered training organisation that delivers different certificates as well, and we also have our mentor and scholarships program as well. So the scholarships, it's a national program for young people who want to maybe go on to university or engage in some kind of study, but might not have those sort of like the financial resources and things that they need to kind of get themselves through that study. And so we have lots of volunteers again who mentor those young people. So again, it's about providing the emotional support, but then also financially providing the practical support to help them get through their studies, so that they're not disadvantaged, but like compared to any other young person, they're still able to achieve their dreams and goals through study if that's what they're after.
Yeah, I guess especially these days, it is quite important to get an education. Yeah. Just one question about integrating back into society. Because homelessness people are like currently slightly more disadvantaged than other people. What do you think is like the main strategy that Youth Off the Street uses to help them integrate back into society?
Yeah, I think like you're right that if a young person is experiencing homelessness, that can kind of put them a bit on the margins of society. But as I said earlier, you'd probably be surprised to see that young people experiencing homelessness, sometimes they are still at school, or sometimes they are working a job, or they are at university and things like that as well. So they're probably a little more integrate into the community than perhaps people realize. So that's one thing I would say. But for those young people who are particularly kind of like marginalized and perhaps have been disconnected from education, training, family support, community support, cultural support, all that kind of stuff. I think one of the most important things is that sense of connection, that sense of belonging and community, because that often is one of the most like foundational pieces that you kind of need to be able to kind of get into educational training, or to get a job, or to maintain a tenancy. I think it's really important that young people actually are able to build relationships and connections and feel that sense of like belonging and identity. So it's just as much about the kind of emotional, social kind of support and skills as it is about the kind of practical, or here's some accommodation and you've got a roof over your head. I think that was the other thing I learned when I first came into the sector, was that you can support a young person into accommodation, but that is really only like 50% of it. There's a lot of other things that have happened that have impacted their sense of belonging, their sense of trust, and so rebuilding some of that stuff is really critical to helping them really thrive and not return to homelessness in future as well.
Right. So, actually, that kind of does lead into what I was thinking before, but do you think that exiting homelessness is a big major? Do you think a big part of exiting homelessness would be getting that spiritual and mental connection with people that allows them to take those first steps in rebuilding their life?
I think that that human connection is a really critical part of breaking some of these cycles of disadvantage. But it's only half the picture. Like there's a lot of systems challenges as well. So like we can build lovely relationships and trust and people's sense of belonging and identity, but if there's still no affordable housing, then they're
Yeah.
not going to be able to sort of break free of that situation. So it's kind of it's a combination of factors. It's making sure that we do actually have a system that creates affordable housing options for people, that there are employment and education and study opportunities as well for people that are accessible, that to anybody, no matter what your background is or how much sort of money you have, that you're able to access an education and that you're able to kind of have those employment opportunities. And then, the community and the connection bit as well, I think really helps to facilitate and sort of maintain that as well. So there's no silver bullet really, I think, for it. It's a combination of factors.
Right. So, final question. It's a bit philosophical, but what do you think could be done to reduce homelessness as a whole if there was no boundaries on like budget or like the house prices that are happening right now?
Look, just more affordable housing is definitely something that we need, like more of a housing supply, obviously. That's a big challenge in Sydney, and the affordability of that. And then I think just giving people, young people especially, need time to establish themselves before they can really rent long term or purchase a property or anything like that. I think often for young people who are experiencing homelessness, because they don't have necessarily the same kind of supports and resources around them like other young people might have, they've got to move out of home so much earlier. They've got, more bills and things like that to pay, and they don't have much of a safety net to kind of fall back on. So I think just leveling the playing field a little bit so that they're actually able to just take the time to be a young person, to study, to learn, to build relationships and their sense of like belonging, and not trying to just push people straight into, paying rent and all that kind of stuff, but just kind of just staggering that approach so they can actually be a young person and enjoy their adolescence and their early adult years, because young people experiencing homelessness are often forced to grow up much quicker than any other young person, which can really impact their quality of life, and it's quite stressful when you're that young and you've got to be thinking of all of these things that a young person shouldn't really need to think about or do on their own.
Yeah, I can really see how that ties into like the psychological support that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it from me for the questions. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we end it off?
No, I don't think so. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it helps people kind of think just to shift their thinking a little bit about what youth homelessness looks like,
Yeah,
and how to support a young person experiencing homelessness. And hopefully there's also a sense of hope as well, that there are people out there, there's organisations like Youth Off the Streets that specialise in this space and are, willing and available to support people. So thank you for listening and for being curious about what we do and supporting our work. Really appreciate it.
yeah, thanks, Brittany. I've learned so much more about youth homelessness than I've probably learned my whole life. So yeah, these